They thought I would leave quietly. They thought a sheet cake from Costco and a half-hearted speech would be enough to close the chapter. They thought humiliation was just a management tool. What they didn't know was that I wasn't just leaving the building. I was taking the keys to it. My name is Rachel Monroe, and for 14 years I was the invisible backbone of Riverton Systems Compliance Division. I was 39, divorced, no kids, and dangerously good at a job nobody understood until it stopped working. The illusion shattered on a Tuesday morning at 10:32 a.m. I remember the exact time because I had just taken a sip of my third coffee when I walked into conference room B. At the head of the table stood our newly hired director of operations, Brandon Keller. 42, Harvard MBA, silver at the temples, imported from a flashy Silicon Valley startup that had burned through venture capital but somehow labeled it innovation. He had been with us 26 days. That was apparently long enough to decide I was unnecessary. "Rachel," he said, smiling like a man about to perform a magic trick. "Perfect. We're discussing redundancies in compliance." I should have recognized the tone. It was the tone of someone who thinks knowledge is just data arranged nicely in a slide deck. He clicked to a PowerPoint. My PowerPoint. The one I had presented last quarter to the Federal Audit Board. Only now it had red circles and bold annotations that screamed inefficiency. "I've reviewed your department," Brandon continued. "And frankly, I'm struggling to understand why we need someone at your compensation level to manage what appears to be routine administrative tasks." The air left the room. 12 people avoided eye contact. I felt my heartbeat slow instead of accelerate. That was the moment something shifted. Not anger. Not panic. Clarity. "Routine administrative tasks?" I asked evenly. He nodded. "Report generation. Data verification. System monitoring. An intern with strong Excel skills could handle this." There it was. Publicly. Deliberately. An intern. 14 years of federal compliance oversight reduced to spreadsheet babysitting. I glanced around the table. Marcus from IT stared at his keyboard. Susan from legal looked like she wanted to disappear. Nobody spoke. Brandon leaned back, satisfied. "We're streamlining. We can't afford legacy overhead." Legacy overhead. That's what I was now. I stood up slowly. Removed my access badge. The one encoded with 17 security clearances. I placed it on the conference table in front of him. "You're absolutely right," I said, my voice steady and professional. "If that's all my job is, you won't need me." The smile faltered. He hadn't expected surrender. He'd expected debate. "Rachel, let's not overreact," HR chimed in weakly. "There are procedures." "Exactly," I replied. "There are." I walked out of the room knowing something they did not. Riverton Systems held federal contracts worth nearly $400 million annually. Every one of those contracts relied on a compliance platform called Sentinel-9. Sentinel-9 did not run on optimism. It ran on layered authentication protocols tied directly to the U.S. Treasury and Securities and Exchange Commission. And for the past 6 years, Sentinel-9 recognized exactly one Level 3 administrator. Me. The farewell party was scheduled for Friday at 3 p.m. Mandatory cheerfulness. Blue streamers. A cake that read, "Good luck, Rochelle." They misspelled my name. Brandon arrived 20 minutes late with a glass of champagne and that same polished grin. "We're excited about new energy and compliance," he announced to the room. Fresh eyes. I smiled back. "Speaking of fresh eyes," I said lightly, "I assume the transition plan is ready. Especially with Monday's federal filings." Marcus nearly choked. Brandon waved a dismissive hand. "Everything's documented." "The binders from 2019? I asked sweetly. Because Sentinel-9's authentication layers were overhauled in 2020 after the audit scare. You remember that, right? Silence. I continued cutting cake. Of course, whoever replaces me will just need to register a new federal cryptographic signature with Treasury, SEC, and Homeland Security. That takes, what, 3 weeks minimum? Provided there's no review delay. Brandon's jaw tightened. We'll handle it. I nodded politely. I'm sure you will. I left the party early. They thought my calm meant defeat. What it meant was preparation. You see, Sentinel-9's architecture had 3 authentication tiers. Tier 1 was basic credentials. Tier 2 involved rotating encryption keys synchronized daily with federal servers. Tier 3 was the real lock. A biometric-linked digital signature legally tied to one human identity. Mine. Federal regulations required that upon termination, the administrator must revoke personal tokens within 48 hours. After that, the system would enter compliance lockdown until a certified replacement was approved. It wasn't sabotage. It was law. Friday evening, I sat in my home office staring at Sentinel-9's administrator console. Everything green. Stable. Trusted. At the bottom of the screen, a timer, 47 hours 12 minutes until mandatory lockout. I began following procedure. I revoked my personal admin token. A red warning appeared, no certified level 3 administrator detected. System will enter restricted compliance mode in 48 hours. Assign replacement to prevent service interruption. I screenshot it for documentation. Then I removed my privately written optimization scripts. 200 automation sequences I had built on my own time. They weren't in the company repository. Without them, processes that took minutes would take hours. Red alerts multiplied. My phone buzzed. Marcus. Rachel, I'm seeing authentication warnings. Yes, I replied calmly. Section 7.3 of the Compliance Transition Protocol. I'm following it precisely. The system says lockdown Monday morning. Correct. Can you extend it? Not unless I'm an employee. Federal signatures aren't transferable. Silence. Panic. Saturday morning, the alerts escalated. Sentinel-9 began restricting non-essential commands. By Sunday, federal handshake verifications were failing intermittently. The countdown read 14 hours. I received 17 missed calls. Sunday night, Susan called. Rachel, if filings fail tomorrow, contracts freeze. I'm aware. People could lose jobs. So could companies that treat expertise like overhead. I wasn't cruel. I was factual. Monday morning at 8:03 a.m., the SEC sent a non-compliance notice. At 8:47, Treasury froze pending payments. At 9:12, my phone rang. CEO Daniel Whitmore. Calm voice stretched thin. Ms. Monroe, we need to discuss your system. Not my former system. My system. Interesting choice of words. There's nothing to discuss, I said evenly. Federal protocol is clear. What would it take to prevent lockdown? There it was. Finally. Recognition. I glanced at the timer. 11 minutes remaining. There is one exception, I said. If the board reclassifies me as critical compliance consultant within the transition window, my credentials can be extended 6 months. Terms? $5,000 per day. 6-month contract prepaid. Full executive authority over compliance decisions. Written apology entered into board minutes. Silence. Furious whispering in the background. Send it, he said finally. At 11:21 a.m., the contract hit my inbox. Signed. At 11:22, I initiated federal redesignation. At 11:23, Sentinel and 9 turned from red to green. Lockdown cancelled. The war room on the other end of that conference line erupted in relief. I closed my laptop slowly. "I'll see you tomorrow at 9, I said. "And Mr. Whitmore. I'll be taking Brandon's office." Mine had terrible lighting. Tuesday morning, 8:58 a.m., I walked back into Riverton Systems through the same glass doors I had exited 4 days earlier with a cardboard box and a forced smile. This time I wore charcoal gray, heels sharp enough to echo authority down the marble lobby. The security guard blinked when he saw my new badge. Consultant. Executive clearance. Full access. Funny how titles change when money is bleeding. Brandon Keller's corner office was already cleared out. His nameplate removed. His framed MBA replaced by a blank wall. I set my leather briefcase on the desk that used to belong to the man who called me Legacy overhead. The city skyline stretched across the windows, bright and indifferent. Within minutes, CEO Daniel Whitmore knocked and stepped inside, followed by Thomas Green from legal and a woman I didn't recognize. She introduced herself as Karen Holt, Senior Compliance Investigator with the SEC. Calm voice. Measured eyes. The kind of person who reads between lines for a living. "Ms. Monroe," she said, extending her hand. "We understand yesterday's disruption was narrowly avoided." "Correct," I replied. "All procedures followed federal regulation." She smiled faintly. "Yes. We reviewed your documentation." "Impeccable." That word echoed in the room. Impeccable. For 3 hours, I walked her through Sentinel-9's architecture. Every authentication layer. Every dependency. Every vulnerability that Brandon's cost-cutting enthusiasm had nearly triggered. She listened carefully, occasionally glancing at Whitmore, who looked 10 years older than he had on Monday morning. "So let me summarize," Karen said finally. Mr. Keller attempted to eliminate what he perceived as redundancy, without understanding that Ms. Monroe was not redundancy. She was the fail-safe. Whitmore cleared his throat. "That assessment is accurate." Karen nodded. "The SEC will be recommending a mandatory compliance audit and requiring Riverton Systems to certify a minimum of 3 Level 3 administrators going forward. No single points of failure." I didn't miss the subtle emphasis. "No more Rachel Monroe situations." "Understood," Whitmore said quickly. When she left, the room felt lighter and heavier at the same time. "Rachel," Whitmore said, dropping the formality now that federal eyes were out the door. "I owe you an apology." I let the silence stretch. "You do," I said calmly. He nodded. "Brandon has been terminated with cause. His strategic initiatives are under review. The board wants you involved in all operational decisions affecting compliance moving forward." I appreciated the shift in tone. Respect earned under pressure tends to stick. "I'll need immediate recruitment authorization," I said. 3 internal candidates. Not external hires. He didn't hesitate. Approved. By noon, Marcus from IT sat across from me, looking like a man who hadn't slept in 48 hours. "We were minutes away from losing everything," he said quietly. "No," I corrected gently. "You were minutes away from discovering it was already gone." He swallowed hard. "Teach us," he said. That was the moment that mattered. Not the contract. Not the office. The humility. Over the next 6 weeks, I did what I should have been empowered to do years ago. I built a real compliance infrastructure. I selected 3 internal employees who had been overlooked. Sarah Martinez from Data Analytics, brilliant but labeled not leadership material. James Wu from Systems Engineering, too quiet to be promoted under Brandon's charisma metrics. And Marcus himself, who had technical instincts sharper than anyone realized. We worked long days in that corner office, mapping every line of Sentinel-9, rebuilding redundancies, creating documentation that could survive ego. I taught them what no MBA course covers. That compliance is not about forms. It is about trust relationships embedded in federal systems. That digital signatures are legal identities. That automation without human judgment is fragility disguised as efficiency. The federal audit came and went. Painful, but survivable. Riverton paid fines, but avoided suspension. Treasury unfroze payments. Homeland Security withdrew its escalation review. Slowly, the building stopped vibrating with panic. One Friday afternoon, Sarah walked into my office holding her federal certification letter. Level 3 administrator, she said, almost whispering it. I stood and hugged her. You earned it. A week later, James and Marcus were certified as well. 3 administrators. No more single points of failure. The irony wasn't lost on me. The company that once thought one was too many now had 3 by federal mandate. Around that time, I received an offer. The Federal Reserve. They were designing a new interbank compliance infrastructure and needed someone who understood systemic risk from the inside out. The salary was impressive. The responsibility enormous. The opportunity irresistible. Whitmore asked me to stay permanently as Chief Compliance Officer. Executive title. Board seat. 7-figure package. You've proven your value, he said. I smiled. I didn't need to prove it. You needed to see it. He didn't argue. On my final day, I walked the compliance floor one last time. People who once avoided eye contact now nodded with quiet respect. Not admiration. Understanding. Brandon's departure had become an industry cautionary tale. His LinkedIn profile read, "Open to opportunities." Seattle location. No endorsements for operational excellence. I didn't feel triumph. I felt equilibrium. At 5:45 p.m., Marcus met me in the parking lot. We won't let it happen again, he said. I know, I replied. Because now you understand what's actually holding the system together. As I drove home, sunset spilled gold across the Riverton skyline. The same skyline I'd stared at during those 48 ticking hours. The difference was clarity. Brandon thought he was cutting cost. What he cut was comprehension. He saw salary. He didn't see risk mitigation. He saw tasks. He didn't see institutional memory. He saw overhead. He didn't see infrastructure. The real lesson wasn't revenge. It was visibility. Most critical work in any organization is invisible until it fails. And by the time it fails, it's almost too late. A week later, I sat in a quiet Washington, D.C., conference room, onboarding with Federal Reserve officials who spoke in acronyms and contingency models. They valued redundancy. They valued documentation. They valued the uncomfortable truth that resilience costs money. I thought about that farewell party cake with my name misspelled. I almost laughed. Replaceable. That word had nearly cost a company $400 million. But here's what matters most. I didn't destroy Riverton. I didn't sabotage anything. I followed procedure. I respected the law. I held the door open until it was legally required to close. That's the difference between vengeance and boundaries. If you've ever been underestimated at work, if someone ever looked at you and decided your expertise was just overhead, remember this. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't fighting. It's stepping aside and letting reality educate them. Thank you for listening to my story. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Have you ever seen someone labeled replaceable who was anything but? Drop your experience below. And if you enjoy stories about corporate power, workplace justice, and real-world consequences, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Because sometimes, the quiet professionals have the loudest lessons.